I'm Ari Gronich, and this is Create a New Tomorrow podcast. Welcome back to another episode of Create a New Tomorrow. I'm your host, Ari Gronich, and remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, comment below, do all of those things so we can start conversations that matter and create a new tomorrow today. Today with me, I have Calvin Correli. Calvin is a SaaS founder, serial entrepreneur, and spiritual teacher. He founded a company called Simplero, which is an integrated software platform for coaches, authors, speakers, and other information marketers to run their entire business in one place. So that's pretty cool. But he calls that more a LaaS instead of a SaaS, which is love as a service versus software as a service. So, your mission is amazing. And I'm going to let you tell a little bit more about who you are, why you created this platform, but more than anything, what it is that you think the world needs to do and us, in it can do to make the world a little bit better place. So we'll get started with just kind of your quick bio. Tell us a little bit about how you became who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ari. Super appreciate you having me on here. Looking forward to the conversation with you today. I started Simplero. So I was born and raised in Denmark and was building, always sort of an entrepreneur. Both my parents were entrepreneurs. I got into computers and programming super early when I was like 5 or 6 years old and got off to a good start on my career. Pretty much always working for myself. I had one job for a company in Boston, just around the year 2000, but that was it. But then really got into struggling as an entrepreneur, really kind of struggling all around as a human being, to be honest. I felt like I had failed as a father, as a husband, as a son to my parents, as an entrepreneur on all levels. And so it really got me down this path of soul searching, of discovering, questioning beliefs, learning to feel. I grew up like, I don't know if you can recognize this from yourself or clients, right? That like just not able to feel a thing. It was like I was living from my neck up and all of this feeling stuff was like a mystery. And it was just every once in a while it would explode. So I went through that process of therapy and coaching and body therapy and working with a spiritual teacher. And that was what led to a moment where I was like, finally asking myself the question, what am I here to do? What is it I really want to do versus just trying to be successful, just trying to make money, just trying to make ends meet, right? And that was what I sat down one day and in that process sort of arrived the answer to me. I'm here to integrate spirituality and entrepreneurship. At the core, we're not spiritual on Sundays or, on the side. It's at the heart of what I do for a living, what I do in business. My company's here to be an integral part of my spiritual mission, if you will, my life purpose. And I was like, what I realized is that that's really how we can solve all of the challenges that we're facing as humanity is by, it's not through government, it's not through, nonprofits, typically it's business. Business is at the core of like creation. And if business is done well, it can really solve all of the challenges that we're facing. And I mean, business is just a collection of people coming together to solve problems. It's kind of all it is, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
So then, my contrarian point of view in life is, so if business is at the heart of the possibility of solving the world's problems, why do you think we've allowed companies as conglomerations of people to do things that are the antithesis of solving the world's problems, but more on the side of creating issues where there maybe previously weren't any issues?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good question, right? Like, I think the short answer is because we're humans, right? Because, I mean, it's not isolated to companies. Obviously, governments do, their fair share of problems, right? I think anytime humans come together, we create a mess because we are a mess. Which is why, for me, the goal really is to raise the conscious level. I talk about physical, mental, emotional, spiritual maturity, those four, right? Physical, we got to be healthy. Body and mind are not separate, right? If your body is a mess, your mind is a mess. Mental, learning to question your beliefs, just realizing that you are not your thoughts, you are not your ideas about yourself, right? Emotional maturity, learning to not suppress feelings, not vomit them out and identify with your feelings, but just feel them and let them flow through you. And spiritual, in the sense of having a sense of a bigger purpose in life, some sort of meaning. Without it, we're lost, right? And they all tie together. And so once that happens and we grow up as people, I think I bet you would agree, the most quote unquote adults in the world right now are really kind of children, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, right? It just happened to be in an adult body. So there really is like a big, massive maturity that needs to happen in the world if we want to solve these problems. And once that happens, solving the problems becomes fairly easy, and then business and government can become a vehicle for solving those challenges. But when it's done unconsciously, yeah, it's going to have the opposite effect.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the statistics that I've heard and research is that people are approximately the age of their first major trauma. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
That makes sense. Yeah.
whenever that first major trauma happened, you kind of get locked in
Yep.
the maturity level of that age. And then anytime something triggers that, the same feeling that happened with that trauma, you revert back to that age of a person and that reaction and those kinds of things. So it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it in perspective. And in my world as a therapist and healer and so on, the only way to solve that problem is to go after the issues that are in the tissues, so to speak, that
Totally.
are, you have a somatic trauma, which basically means a trauma to your physical self. And the only way to heal that trauma is to go directly to where that trauma occurred. And so an emotional trauma almost always happens in the body as well. So when you look at like Chinese medicine, anger lives in the liver, worry lives in the kidneys, the sweetness of life in your pancreas, the lungs are joy, feeling joy. Your stomach is contentment. And so these emotions, you can imagine anytime somebody says, right, I'm feeling this little queasiness in my gut. Well, that's an emotion that's creating a physical response, right?
Yeah.
So tell us how you've come along this journey of finding out that you were having some of these kinds of issues, and what did you do, like, I mean, the actual steps that you took to start the process of healing. And let's go with the beginning of that process, because I know a lot of people, it's the beginning that they struggle with the most.
Yeah. So let me just, on what you were saying with the issue in the tissue and the age and stuff. So I was fortunate because I'm from Denmark. I discover there's a therapy form there called body SDS, which is body therapy. It's a system that's developed in Denmark by this incredible geniuses, past now, but they're like third and fourth generation are now actively working on it. My friend, I've become friend with the founder of the education there. He's 56, 57 karate champion and has educated 600 therapists over there. So it's one of my projects is actually to bring that to the US, because I've tried to ton of different things. And this is just so powerful at really getting to those core wounds in the body, right? Because a lot of the stuff is, you can't really get to it with words because it's precognition. And so the body is such a powerful tool. So I'm so with you on that. And part of my journey has been to rediscover my relationship with my masculine side and with my father. And so that was a very deliberate process of reconnecting with sort of like an 6-8-year-old version of myself, and then figuring out how to reparent him up to being, a young, healthy adult. But that's more recent. That was like 3 years ago that journey started for me. The going back in time to answer your question is like the beginning. I think very early moment was in 2003 when a friend of mine, I had called an advisory board meeting for my company and brought some really smart friends of mine, people that I knew. And afterwards, one of them looked me in the eyes and he was like, dude, we've been here for 3 hours and I still don't know what you want. And there's something in that question that just made me like, wait, what? Like, how those like questions that just open a gap in your consciousness, your mind somewhere. And you're like, wait, I didn't know that there was anything, like that there was a hole here, but now there is. It was like, I didn't know that you were allowed to want anything in business. I thought it was all like, we just do business stuff. Right. And then I was like, I didn't know what I wanted. I just wanted to be quote unquote successful so that I would feel okay or worthy. I didn't have any clue what I wanted. And I think that was the moment that sort of sparked that realization that I don't know what I want because I can't feel a thing. I can't feel myself. And so one of the things I did was, my mom had a friend who was a therapist, really interesting guy, by the way. So he had started as a surgeon doing breast operations on women with breast cancer. And what he had noticed was that they all had the same psychological pattern. There was resentment towards men and there was resentment towards their own femininity. And so he was like, what is that? And so he went back to school to study psychology, because he's like, hey, if I can solve this before I have to cut these ladies' breasts off, that would kind of be a lot better. And so that was what he dedicated. He's passed now, but that was what he dedicated his life to since then. And so I kind of found his phone number and gave him a call. And I was like, hey, I think I need some help here. I think I need to talk to a therapist. And I was terrified. I was terrified of admitting that. I didn't want my parents to know. I didn't want any of my friends to know. I had this idea that if you need to talk to a therapist, you're really broken, right? That's kind of admitting defeat. Like at that point, you might as well go kill yourself. But then like, I wasn't going to do that. So this was as close as I got. But that was really my belief system, was that there had to be something terribly wrong with you if you needed that. Like I learned, no, like everybody needs help, right? We're all kind of, messed up from our upbringing, and it's our job to go sort out that mess, right? Reparent ourselves, because our parents probably didn't do a great job. But that was like, it was a big step for me, I'll tell you, just admitting that I needed help. And yeah, that was my first step. And then like, once I got going on that, I was like, all right, let's, I hired a coach at one point. That felt kind of safe too, right? It's like business coaching. Yeah, that's good. Hired a coach, and she was like, a couple sessions into it, she was like, you should take this coach education and learn to become a coach. I was like, wait, me? Like I'm not a people person. Everybody tells me I'm terrible with people. Like, what would I do doing that? But I did, and I loved it. And so, and I remember thinking like, all right, once I've taken this education, then I know everything there is to know about like psychology, like, humans and how their brains work. Yeah, no, I didn't. It's a pretty deep topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you were to just take a look behind the scenes, so to speak, behind the curtain at what it is that is at the root cause of kind of all of this let's say, opposition to nature, right? Which is opposition to nature, meaning we don't do the things that we know to do to feel good, like connect with community and family on a regular basis. That's something we've studied. We know that the people who do that live the longest, are the happiest, et cetera. We don't do that here. So why don't you kind of break apart or break down for us some of the things that you've found to be solutions for kind of the state we find ourselves in as far as emotionally drained. I mean, you obviously, we see all of the current suicides and abuse and protests and dissatisfaction with the world as it is. And then get into kind of my perspective on it is we created this shit out of our imagination, and now we're complaining about it rather than fixing it. So if we can realize that we've made this whole thing up, maybe we can start the process of making it better. So what is your take on from your education, the experiences that you've had, on what it is that we would need to do to kind of come back to that natural way of being with each other and with ourselves?
Yeah. I think at the root of it is us believing our thoughts, right? Like we believe that the thoughts that are in our heads are true, right? And that they have something valuable to tell us, which sometimes they do, but oftentimes they don't, right? If you could imagine living in a state where there are no thoughts, or that whatever thoughts are there are just kind of passing by and you're not, attached to them, like meditation, right? Once you do that in that state, inside you will find every single time is this sense of spaciousness and joy, and you're just present in the present moment, right? There's never any dissatisfaction in that. Never, ever, right? It doesn't exist, right? The dissatisfaction only exists because we're telling ourselves a story about something that should be the way it's not, and then we become unhappy, right? It's the only way that happens, and it happens reflexively. And we can still have feelings in that state, in that thoughtless state, if you will, but they pass through quickly, right? Like they just they're just waves, and we ride the wave, and then it's gone, and then it's out, right? So it's when we get stuck in our belief patterns, and then that we do that so habitually that it really gets in and becomes part of our biochemistry, right? Like it infects our liver. I remember you mentioned with the liver and the anger, right? That I saw a study some years ago where they gave multivitamins to prison inmates, and violence in the prison dropped because it actually helped their liver, and then they were less violent, right? It's like these things are tied together. So I really think at the root of it is our believing in our thoughts. Like, oh, I got it. I'm behind. I got to rush. I got like all these things, right? And then we just like stop being present with ourselves and then with others. I mean, that's the root.
So you've had, I'm sure, a lot of clients, a lot of people pass through your software, so you get to see a lot of data. What do you think is the number one thought that you've seen with your clients, the number one thing that is recurring amongst the people that you've talked to, your clients, the data that you've seen, that number one thing that's stopping people from being happy, the number one thought that's keeping them out of, being in life fully?
Yeah, I just need to get to here, and then I will, right? I just need more customers, or I just need this to change, or my health, or whatever it is. It's kind of like that, like the horse or the donkey with a carrot on a stick out in front, right? And that's how we live our lives. Like, I just got to get this, like, finish with school, then I got to get this degree, then I got to get this job, then I just got to get this promotion, then I just got to get, like, whatever it is, right? Like, I'll just have to find a good partner, and then, like, have kids, then, like, when the kids are in school, when they're out of school, like when they leave, like, and then we wake up one day and we're old and retired, and we're like, oh yeah, like, all the things that we were going to do, and now we don't have the health or the energy or, the desire anymore. It's so habitual for us to always be looking to the future.
So looking to the future, when I look to the future, because, and I'll take a saying out of context and out of probably exact repeating. So it's me just paraphrasing, but a man's grasp or reach should exceed his grasp, or else what's heaven for?
Yeah.
That's the saying. And
yeah.
The idea is that you're reaching much, much, much further than you think you possibly can grasp, because that's how you reach to heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that seems to be what you just said is something that is causing people a lot of anguish and emotional drainage and pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The challenge is, there's a concept that I talk about, which is the satisfied drive, right? So I love that, like, divine dissatisfaction. It's never good enough. We're always striving to do better. We're always going for more. I think that's a natural part of life, right? A tree is constantly growing, but that doesn't mean that you have to be dissatisfied with where you're at, right? It's that feeling that, like, okay, I'm unhappy right now because I feel unworthy. That was my thing, right? I'm not worthy until I'm successful to some metric, whatever arbitrary metric that was. Sometimes it would be like, I have to have a company with 50 employees. I think that's because my mom's software company, she grew it to about 50. Other times it was like, I have to have Bill Gates level wealth before I turn 30. That was a little bit more challenging, and it was kind of waver, right? In order to prove myself worthy of even existing, right? That's not a good place to be in. It's not, right? So it's really the ability to love ourselves and love life as it is, love the present moment, love reality exactly as it is right now, and yet still be driven out of love, but not out of fear, not out of unworthiness and needing to prove ourselves, but out of the love of creating stuff, of expressing yourself and putting it out there. That's where we want to create from, right?
Right. So the question becomes, we're in this interesting world at the moment where there is the perception of a massive amount of problem, meaning we're being locked down, we're being shut down, we're being censored, all these kinds of things, right? And so the complaining is at this level of unimaginable worldwide whining, so to speak. The people that I've talked to, that I like to talk to, are the people who are creating solutions, who are pivoting, who are moving towards something else. And that gives them a sense of value. And what you're talking about with this unworthiness, I think that this is a bigger issue than we talk about, for sure. How many people, and this is going out to the audience right now, how many of you have felt unworthy in your life? Not just unworthy until, but unworthy even though. Even though I've already been a success, even though I've already made a massive impact, even though, so if you're a leader in the world right now and you're still feeling that I'm unworthy thing. So how do you unpack that unworthy thing for your clients? Because I don't think that most people understand how to unpack that. That's such an ingrained human mindset place to be.
Yeah. I think I agree. And I think, and related to is this sense of guilt, right? Guilt for like maybe having achieved and you don't, again, quite feel worthy of it. And then that leads to a sense of guilt or, sense of privilege or whatnot. Yeah, to me, it's one of the things that tends to work for me is to just say, all right, so what? So what? Maybe I am unworthy. That can I just accept that? Can I live with that? Like, what is it really? It's a belief, right? That starts a feeling, and then that feeling we like label as something unwanted, like, oh, I don't want this, like, oh, bad feeling, right? We don't even really feel it, but we just don't want it. There's a saying that I love, which is any struggle is a struggle to avoid feeling a certain feeling. Right? And so we just go out of our ways to avoid touching that thing that makes us feel unworthy, instead of going the other way and just being like, all right, let me just feel it. And then one of the things I love to do is, instead of like going into sort of the label of the feeling, oh, unworthiness, just what is the sensation? Is it like a slight vibration in my chest? Is it like tingling sensation? Like, what is the physical sensation? Forget the label, forget the thoughts, just focus on your body. When you go to that really unworthy place, like what is the body sensation? And then just breathe into that and allow it to expand and just like roll with it, enjoy it. And what you realize, oh, it's actually kind of fun. It's a little ticklish. It's a little, you realize it's not dangerous at all. It's not scary at all. And then it stops having this power over you. And maybe it's okay. Like, instead of being like, oh no, I want to prove that I am worthy, like, go away, stupid unworthiness feeling, right? Just allow yourself to maybe I am unworthy. Unworthy for what? What does it even mean, right? And then it starts to kind of break down.
Right. Bucky Fuller, who's an inspiration for the show, he was kind of the inspiration for my book, A New Tomorrow. I don't know if you know who Buckminster Fuller was, but
I do.
One of his quotes, and I'm going to bastardize this, pretty good, but we have to get over the auspicious notion that people need to work in order to be of value. There is currently, and this was back in the 60s, he says there is currently approximately 10,000 people on the planet that have the technology and creativity to create enough technology that nobody else on the planet will even need to work, let alone have that be their value system. So, going with this thought, since I completely paraphrased the actual quote, but going with the thought that we don't need to work to be of value, that completely goes against the nature of this country, at least of the United States and a lot of countries as well, is that we need to work in order to be of value. And yet we end up working 40 to 80 hours of, a week of our life, and doing that for 40 plus years and never really living. So how do we break that auspicious notion that in order for people to be of value and deserve food and health and life, right, that they need to be actively working at a thing that may or may not even be the thing that they're, passionate about, good at, or wanting to do?
Yeah. So here's my thoughts on that. I think there's an inherent need for humans to feel of value, to be of service to other humans, right? To do something that other people appreciate. And the way that we tend to show that appreciation is with money, right? That we exchange values, ideas, money. I think that's deep in us, like that need to contribute in some way, to be part of this exchange. I do think it's I think any form of feeling unworthy or guilty or wrong is unhelpful. I think, self-love is superior. I think a lot of the things that people associate with, people being too full of themselves and that kind of stuff is really, just lack of self-love, really. So I'm a huge fan of self-love. So, and there is this tendency, right? Like whenever we get new technologies that allows us to work more efficient, so we'll have more free time. Yeah, right. That never ever happens, because it just then it just ups the competition game. And the reality is we live in a competitive world, right? That's just by nature. That's how it works, right? Like just in the animal world, it's still a competitive world. So so I'm not really sure. One thing I'm not personally a fan of the government stepping in and sort of like, taking over and paying people. Like for me, it's like the more that we can just do amongst people, amongst ourselves, the better it is. So yeah,
I'm gonna kind of put my 2 cents in here right at this place.
Mm-hmm.
The government is people. And I'm saying that in a way I want to really drive this home to the audience. The government is people. We made it, we created it, we built the systems around it, we turned it into this massively, massive machinery of life, but we created it. And I get really tired of people saying things like the government shouldn't, as if it's something separate from we the people, right? Because we the people are the people that make up the corporations. We make up the government. We make up the rules. We make up the systems, and we make up the entire way in which we live by. And I find that people use the government as a really great scapegoat so that they don't have to take any responsibility in what's going on by saying, well, the government shouldn't, or the government should, or the government this, as if it's something separate from us. And so what I would say to what you just said is, to the audience, if you don't like how big the government is, how slow the government is, how inefficient the government is, how whatever it is that you have an opinion about the government for, you are the person responsible for making that government different. So if we got 50 million people who are really dissatisfied with the government that's made up of like 500, 600 people, then shouldn't those 50 million people stop the machinery of the government and shift it, or do something to change it, or run for office so you could be a part of the solution versus a part of the problem and the whining? So it's just my controversial side that says, I get it that people think that these governments are such evil entities and the people who run them are such agenda-driven people, but the fact of the matter is, it's you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree. Like we like for some version of like people created the government, right? And people run the government. Yes, absolutely. And yeah, and I think my point is just there's several organizational vehicles with which to achieve certain ends, right? Government is one, business is another, just neighbor to neighbor, or communities, or are other vehicles, NGOs or vehicles, nonprofits. So there's different organizational structures that can achieve different things, and some are better suited for certain things than others, right?
Absolutely. And that I can totally agree with. And like I said, the only caveat I would say is I don't find anything different about a bureaucrat at a company versus a bureaucrat at a government versus a bureaucrat in your home.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The difference is like the monopoly situation that the government inherently has, right? Whereas if it's a company, and then you might presumably have choice, assuming that they're not a monopoly. But yeah, it's fascinating how I keep seeing these numbers just anecdotally of like how many people distrust the government and yet, keep giving power to the government, right? It's like, wait, what's the disconnect here, right?
Exactly. This cognitive dissonance about who needs to do, right? So to people, I think that we've created a society where you got to work 40 to 80 hours a week just to survive, and even that may or may not be a good survival, right? In normal jobs. And so people have stopped doing civic kind of work in many cases, and paying attention to the issues of the day, and therefore the issues of the day have snowballed. And by snowballing, now it's like this massive thing versus what could have been something small that just could have been melted away. Now you've got this massive solid ball of, rolling ice
Right.
run
Yeah.
over the town, so to speak. And so yeah, we getting back to a place where people can remember their civic duties, in some cases their community duties. And I get it, politics are all about national, international now, but getting into your local community government where the initial fraud is happening, or the initial,
Right. Yeah.
where that's going to be what really affects you, the audience, the most. So anyway,
Right.
that's
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I was just talking to someone who's working with I forget, it was honestly if it was like New York City or New York State government, whatever, like the board, like whatever the I don't even know what it's called, but like the kind of like Congress for the city or the state level, and they're just having tremendous trouble just getting people who are willing to run, right? People who are willing to occupy those seats, like. Which is fascinating, because like it's work that needs to be done, but there's very few people who are willing to do it. And I totally understand why they're not. Well, I mean, I wouldn't do that, right? Like I could create a much better life and make more money doing what I'm doing. Why would I do that? So it is kind of fascinating. I had another thought, which was I forget what that was. But anyway, yes.
Yeah, I would rather be a consultant to the government than in the government, but that's just me, because I like to be artificial.
Oh, for sure.
I like to not have a position. I like to not artificially label myself as any one thing. And I think that when you're a politician, we've gotten to a place where you have to label yourself something.
Right.
So those labels, to me as well, are part of what helps create this divide.
Right. There's an interesting, there's a town over in the UK called Frome, Froome, where there's a party called Independence for Frome. So the city council has 17 seats, and this guy decided to start a party where there's no party discipline. So each member of the party is an individual. They get to vote however they want. They're just a party for technical reasons. First time they ran, they got 10 seats out of 17. Next time they got all 17. And so they have this process where when they argue, they have facilitators sometimes, and they'll have this process where they need to argue the opposite viewpoint of what they like. They have to switch sides and argue each other's case, et cetera. And they bring in people. So it's more of a problem solving thing than traditional politics. And it presumably works really, really well. So I'm fascinated with things like that, right? Like there are things that we can do to solve this if people care enough. I remember what I was thinking before, which is what you're talking about, was people having to work, a lot of hours, they don't have the time, etc. I'm also fascinated with how it seems like I grew up I live in New York City now, but I grew up in Denmark, and I think that's been advantageous in many ways. You had, great school, and my parents were very good at, they taught me to program and all these things. But there seems to be a complete lack of teaching people fundamental life skills in this country, right? Which is why we end up on that treadmill, because you don't need to live on that treadmill if you invest. There are communities that are consistently investing in their education. I think like Chinese Americans tend to be really good at that. Asians maybe in general, right? There's Jewish culture around like get educated, get good grades, put in hard work, stay ahead of the game. I remember also they just released the Hillbilly Elegy on Netflix. I haven't seen it yet, but I read the book. Have you heard of it?
No.
So it's a guy named J.D. Vance, and he grew up in, I think, in the Appalachian sort of redneck country. And when his parents, grew up, you could make a decent middle class income by dad working some factory job. They could have their house and kids, and he would pay for the thing, and like upward mobility and things were working. And now these communities are destroyed. Everybody's on drugs and opioids, and there are no jobs. The factories have closed, and it's crap show. And schools are terrible too. What changed it for him? So he got out and got a good job, and most of his friends did. One of the things that changed it for him was he got into the military. He got into the Marines, and in the Marines, they taught him how to eat, how to exercise, and how to manage money. So he was about to go out and buy a car, and then his sergeant was like, "What kind of car are you getting?" And he was like, "Oh, this car." And he's like, "You can't afford that. Like, get this one. It's much more practical and economical." And then he was gonna get some kind of loan. He's like, "How are you gonna finance it?" "Oh, just whatever finance from the dealers." Like, "No, don't do that. Shop around. Get good interest. Get a good deal on the mortgage." And so these fundamental life skills that he'd never learned from his parents, from his upbringing, from his school, learned it in the military. And it fascinates me that like the military is also government, right? So there are parts of the government that actually is able to teach people some of the skills that they actually need to survive and function in society.
Well,
and then there are others that do the exact opposite.
Well, since you didn't grow up here, you probably didn't realize that while you were growing up here and I was growing up, or while you were growing up there and I was growing up here, they actually did have things like home ec in schools and elementary schools, in high schools and so on. We had classes in cooking, sewing, checkbook balancing, things like that. They have since taken those things out of schools in exchange for the football program, basically, because the football program makes them money, but they've taken fundamentally out any kind of life skills and trade skills. So when I was going to school, we had auto shop, we had photography, we had, obviously yearbook and journalism, we had debate clubs, we had youth and government programs, we had wood shop, metal shop. I mean, we had all kinds of trades that we could learn in high school. And those things stopped right around the late 60s, early 70s, and then they started, or they didn't stop, but they started to slow down, thereafter. And as they started to slow down, we saw this big push for people to be into college, go into college, go into college, go into college. And as people would go into college and then obviously graduate with huge amounts of debt and not really wanting or passionate about or able to be in the job of the thing that they studied in college, we started to realize that when they took the trade schools out of high school, they took an entire population and turned them into people that could only get jobs at assembly, as assemblymen in manufacturing plants and so on and so forth, because they no longer had the skills to do trades that they might have been interested, that might have paid them more. Kind of interesting way of dealing with a society. And the excuse in the politics of those educational plans is we don't have enough money to educate our kids. We need, teachers are asking too much. We can't pay them enough, these kinds of things. And so we've really literally sold our kids, future to the highest bidder, so to speak, and shifted the way that they can even think about what trades and what things they might be actually interested in doing to make that impact. And we kind of are directing them, if you don't do this, you won't get ahead, which means that you have to do this. And if all of your friends are doing this, this is the other part of that problem, which helps with the emotional blocking, is that they have to take drugs in order to get the grades to match the other kids in order to get into the position so that they could be in the college. And then in the college, I mean, I got college level, age kids, stepkids, and the drug use that is in those schools is unbelievable. And it's all straight non-recreational, not all of it, but obviously, it's non-recreational. It's all study. It's all get better in school, but they're not learning anything about how to live in the real world, as you were saying.
Yeah. What's going on with colleges seems to be nuts, right? Like just the college student loans that are you can't bankrupt out of, and that are subsidized by the government. Like it's, it seems to be some high level corruption going on there, right? Like, I have kids. My kids are 13, 15. They're in Denmark with their mom. We divorced a decade ago. But if they were here, I would never pay for college for them. I would never encourage them to go to college. I wouldn't. In Denmark, university is paid for through taxes. I wouldn't encourage them to go to university either, right? I got a computer science degree. I learned way more in my first year after I quit. I got a bachelor's degree. I was on my way to a master's. I quit that and took a job instead. I learned so much more the first job out of college than I learned 5 years in university. So,
yeah. Do you think that there's a reason why college and university is getting that reputation of being as unnecessary when, in my parents' generation, and obviously for me, it was like, if you didn't go to college, and I didn't go to college, I went to a trade school, but my brother, was, if you're not going to college, you're not ever going to be a success in life. That's the programming. And now that programming is getting shifted to where, a lot of people are starting to say college isn't where it's at.
Yeah, the internet, right? Like there's anything that you could possibly want to learn, you can find online, most of it for free, right? There's libraries too, obviously, still, right? But books, online courses, you can study from these universities. If you want to buy like single courses and things like that, you can do that. For me, it's about learning. You have to be passionate about where you're learning. You have to want to learn it because you want to, because you care, right? Because you're interested in it. That's the only way that you're ever going to get really good at something. And, presumably you're learning it to use it. And so if you're not really that interested in it and excited about it, like, why would you bother? Right. So, and if you're excited, you learn by doing more than by studying, right? You can read it and study it, but then you have to do it and do it and do it and do it over and over again. So putting it into something where whether it's you're starting something for yourself, right, or you're working for someone else, put it into effect, see it drive results. And that's how you really learn stuff, right? So yeah, there's never been more resources for anyone to learn, which also proves that if you're not improving your skills, if you're not improving your body and your mind and your life in every way that you care about, it's on you, right? There's no excuses at this point, right? Like, it's available to anybody with a smartphone. There's so much stuff available for free to anyone who has a smartphone. There's just zero excuse. So if you're not progressing, it's because you don't want to. It's just because you don't care enough.
Interesting. So let's talk about the menu. So the menu they found is, if it's more than 2 pages, it causes people to go into choice overwhelm. If
Are you talking about like food menus at a restaurant? What are you talking?
a restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
they found, the science, the study, the research has found that if there's more than 2 pages on a restaurant menu, then people go into choice overwhelm, and they are less satisfied with their choice than if they have a 1-page or a 2-page menu and only have certain things that they can get. They choose what they want and they're happy with their choice because the limit. So you talked about going onto Google. Google is, to me, a couple billion page menu. And, you got Dr. Google, you got, that a lot of people are using for their medical questions. But the idea behind this is that, do we have too many choices and not enough truth, to where people can't make a decision? They get overwhelmed with information, and all of a sudden they can't make a choice, they can't make a decision, they can't make an action because of this overwhelm. And now they're not satisfied because of too much choice.
Well, yes. And I mean, that's not going to go away, right? That's never going to change. So that's just a fact that we have to adapt. Like, the being unhappy with your choice is just back to what we were talking about a while ago with, like, believing your thoughts, right? So just ignore that voice. It's one of the things that it seems we're not teaching people is like fundamental thinking skills. Right. I'm not even going to say critical thinking skills, just any kind of thinking, honestly, is in short supply. Right. So just learning to be like, okay, what is the problem? What is the outcome that I want? Honestly, even that is one of the things that fascinates me about politics, is we're constantly debating this intervention or policy versus that. And nobody's saying, well, hey, wait, stop for a second. What does success look like? Right? What do we actually want to achieve here? And like, can we get agreement on that first? Right? And then, all right, what parameters are there for a solution, for a strategy? Well, like, what values do we have? Can we get agreement on that? And then we can start brainstorm solutions, right? But if you haven't figured out what you want first, then nothing else makes sense, right? No, everything else just becomes a waste of time. And people don't get these basic things about how to solve problems. I see it too in business. So many people who are focused on tasks. What are the things I need to do? And I'm like, well, but like, it's not working. We're like, this is the goal. This is the outcome. Like, what else can we try? Right? Because that didn't work. And so there's some fundamental thinking skills that people are missing. So yeah.
This is one of the biggest issues that I have system-wide in almost every system that we've created in the last 20 plus years. Maybe 30, maybe 40, depends on the system, is we're all about procedures versus results. So we do digital marketing right now because that's my biggest challenge. I'm not a digital marketer. Put a body in front of me, I could turn it into an Olympic champion, not a problem, easy peasy. Put a computer in front of me and tell me to digitally market with web hooks and funnels and triggers and minutia, and I go, bah! And so as I go to hire people, my biggest frustration is they're trying to charge me for tasks. Like, well, if I put 15 posts on your Instagram, that's going to be this amount of money. If I add Instagram and Twitter, that's that amount of money, even though it's the same post and I created it and I just did it twice. But I'm going to charge more. And then if I do this, it's that amount of money. I'm like, okay, so what are the results that are going to come. Well, I can't guarantee you results. And I go, okay. And then I look at medicine and I see the same thing. It's we need to do an MRI or an MRI for a knee injury, right? So you tear a meniscus or muscle ligament, you need to do an MRI. But if you go to a doctor, first thing that you got to do is an X-ray. Why? Because you got to do an X-ray before you do an MRI. Why? X-ray is not going to show me what an MRI is going to show me. So why do I need to do the X-ray first? It's another procedure. It's another task. It's another thing that makes absolutely no different in outcome. Zero, zilch, nada.
For you, but for them, it makes pocketbook, right?
Makes pocketbook. But what that does is it creates a scenario in which we create incentivized fraud.
Totally.
Right? We incentivize fraud by doing those kinds of things. We do it in companies, we do it in business, we do it in all kinds of the aspects of our life these days because we're doing task, as you said, versus results. And so let's talk about that a little bit because I just had my nice little rant, but what do you think the cost is of task versus result oriented thinking?
Oh boy. I mean, it's massive, right? It's everywhere. And it's the lack of transparency in choosing, right? Because if you could choose between doctors that did it one way versus the other, like duh, right? But there's no transparency there. Oftentimes there's like de facto monopolies. So and then it's the population just being aware of it and choosing based on that. We have this tendency to just give our authority away to whomever, right? I think it was Werner Erhard, founder of Est back in the day, he had this saying that people walk around with their umbilical cord in hand, just looking for someone to plug it in, somewhere to plug it into, which I think is a great way to say it. I think it's really true. Like people are constantly looking to outsource their authority to someone, right, or something. So, yeah, but it's everywhere. It's like one of my pet peeves is the whole cookie thing, like EU and GDPR, all these privacy laws and like especially these like cookie banners that pop up everywhere. It's like they're designed for people who visit like 1 or 2 websites per week or maybe per day, right? But when you visit like 50 to 100 websites in a day, you end up like clicking that damn thing over and over again. And we condition people to just click the yeah, whatever, go away, right? Like we don't read them. We can't. And so that's another, like someone is making a law that's like making us, more privacy secure or whatever on paper, but in practice, it does nothing. It does the exact opposite at great cost to every company, business that needs to implement this, every user of the internet that needs to click these stupid ass things, right? It's just, there's no accountability. We're not holding other people, businesses, politicians, bureaucrats accountable for actual results. And there's that, it's like a lack of culture of thinking that way. The cost is immense. I honestly think, like, I heard a talk by Milton Friedman a while back where he was talking about how when he was in high school, the government, all of US government, all levels, federal, state, local, all fees and taxes, everything included, was about 10% of the entire GDP. I don't know what the number is now, but I'm sure it's a lot higher. But I don't really think that we're getting that much value for our money. And that's just at the sort of government level, right? That this is everywhere, that we're just wasting so many resources. I wouldn't be surprised if the number is 90% wasted resources based on this inability to think clearly.
What do you think about, I've heard this name touted, but the wholly owned subsidiary, corporation, United States of America, or United States of America is a wholly owned subsidiary of corporate America, right?
Yeah.
So
I think that's pretty true. Yeah.
Has become this corporate shill, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the answer, there are pretty obvious answers of how this can be renegotiated, right? Getting out lobbyists, changing the elections from ones that have to be funded to, just government. We own the airwaves, so to speak, because we're the FCC. So why don't we just take back the air? One of the things that I loved about Ross Perot way back in the day. Now here's what we got to do. We got to get rid of this NAFTA business right here. But he would go on air buying his own airtime. We don't even need to buy your own airtime anymore. You can get paid in sponsorship to go on YouTube. But what I would love to see politicians do is in 30-minute segments with, now it's PowerPoints instead of charts, but I want to see them explain their policies in detail and what they're going to do, and then compare them to the other person's policy and what it's going to do, and do it in a way that's factual. I would love to see that, right? So that we can make decisions about policies and bills. Part of the wholly owned subsidiary is that every single bill is filled with pork, right? What they call pork or whatever. I don't know the exact term, but it's filled with, this bill is for this thing. And yet it's got 50 things in it that have been negotiated for other, special interests and so on. It would be nice if we did, this bill is for this thing. Nothing else is allowed to be in that bill, right? There are things that I believe we could do easily to shift it. But what I want to get at for you is the mentality that we need, the emotional intelligence and maturity that we talked about at the beginning that we need in order to not be reactive, but be proactive in what we're doing and the way we're doing it, so that we can actually accomplish this stuff versus just talking about it in sound bites.
To me, it's what was that?
I said that was a long intro. I apologize for
Drew. Let's go.
But I wanted to be really clear for you.
Yeah. To me, the challenge is that the minute you make these rules, as long as the incentives are the way that they are, the economic incentives, people are going to, the people who want to do bad stuff are going to find a way around it. Right. And as long as we as people don't really care, or we're just so accustomed to politicians are corrupt, it's just the way it is, I don't see that really changing, right? Like, you can say, well, okay, campaign finance law, you can only fund government funds the campaign, blah, blah, blah. But then you have Citizens United, right? Like which free speech, what are you going to do?
Overturn it.
Yeah, but we still have free speech, right? So are you and I allowed to sit here and talk and say, hey, I like this politician, I don't like where is the dividing line? Maybe there's a simple solution. I'm not sure that there is a simple solution there. And that it wouldn't be something that, again, people are going to find ways around, right? So calling me skeptical. I'm open. I'd love that, but I don't know that. My thinking is from a bottom up, grassroots, the more sort of awake the people are, the more we live our lives, right? It's like Joseph Campbell, or Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. It starts here. It starts with you and I, and with everybody here listening, starting to live their lives this way. And then naturally, you're going to start to demand more of others, including our leaders and our quote unquote so-called leaders, the people in charge, right?
Yeah. Here's my only caveat to that. I agree that people need to take personal responsibility for shifting who they are, and that will make a massive change in how we live. And I'll go back to the disagreement that the government or the thing or the whatever is somehow outside of that process. It's not. We're not outside of the government, we're within it. We are the people, and we have in my opinion, the responsibility, the obligation, we are the ones who have to shift the system from the outside in and the inside out. And, Buckminster Fuller makes it perfect. He says, don't challenge the system as it is, make a better system and put it right next door. So I agree. In many cases, you've got to build the medical system that's going to work, and then actually put it to action before it becomes adopted as the next generation of medical system. You got to create something different. But the responsibility of the people to tell the government what to do has been abdicated to the corporations that are now telling the government what to do.
Yeah, well, it's politicians are like, so the way my analysis is, right? Like, so if you're a member of Congress, right, there's the budgets to run these campaigns right now are ludicrous, right? Because these, like, there's 100 senators, and the national budget is, I don't know how much it is, trillions, right? So for each seat is worth a fair share of that amount, right? Because they can shift huge sums around, and so that's why there's a lot of money riding on this stuff, right? And so, like, I don't see, like, when there is this much money riding on it, like, that money is going to find a way to influence those politicians. One of the things, I forget which book it was, but someone was writing a book about how, like, you can't directly bribe politicians, but you can bribe their family members, right? So then, like, it's sons or cousins or whatnot, and then it finds its way. Like, that's kind of the common practice, because that's legal technically, even though it's immoral, but it's legal, and so that's how it's done. And so like, it's kind of like, those, like, when you outlaw something that there's a lot of money riding on and interest in, it's gonna find a way to make a black market out of itself, right? So but I do see sort of an awakening in the population where we're no longer, a lot of people are waking up to, like, hey, we're being lied to, like, things are not being very efficient or smart. There's too much corruption going on. And I believe that there's a new crop of leaders stepping up and being elected to public office. Whether that's going to be enough to, well, at the end of the day, it comes down to, do we care enough as citizens, right? To be like, no, we're not going to put up with this crap, right? Do we care enough? Do we care enough to run for office? Do we care enough to tell the difference between who's, has character and morals and who doesn't, and vote for the guy who with morals and character and not for the other person, right? Given that, again, the media is bought and paid for as much as the politicians, right? So it's a challenge, and the other thing that might happen is that people with morals and character get elected, and then, like, they get compromised very early on, right? I do believe that there's a lot of that kind of mafia kind of thing going on, where we try to get something on you, and now you're kind of like, it's really hard to dig yourself out of that. Not impossible, but it's hard, right? So
just as a matter of the media being hard to trust these days and being bought and paid for, that happened in the late 70s, early 80s with deregulation. And deregulation was a thing about how the government control is so bad, so we deregulate. But what we did is we stopped the news from being a nonprofit to being allowed to be for profit. So prior to that, it was required that they report the news. When they deregulated is when they started this 24-hour news cycle that now allows them to be for profit, which is what allowed them to make this be a special interest thing. And so I think if we understand that this is a result of something very specific, any of the things that we experience are results of very specific things that have been done that can be undone immediately, right? we don't have to wait. We could re-regulate the news to make sure that it's not for profit, that they have no financial incentives to report bad news. And maybe all of a sudden we'll be able to get journalistic integrity back, where they have to name their sources, make sure that the information is correct before they put something out, and et cetera, and so forth. Like I said, I had a conversation with somebody in the media yesterday, so we had a great conversation about this kind of a thing. But, going back to you, because I know I'm taking you completely off of topics normally, used to speaking about, like software and all the wonderful health.
Well, actually, if I can jump in here, because I have, this is actually a passion of mine. I have a project called Notable Nation at notablenation.com, which is about that. And we talked about like that. You mentioned you would rather be, a consultant for politicians than being one. My stated goal is to be not to be a future, but to be a special advisor to the president of the United States on conscious nation building. So
together, we could team up.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
So that's cool. I'm glad because, like I said, I look at your background and I go, okay, I can have this conversation with him and talk to him about the software and the niceties of life. Or I could, challenge the status quo, take you outside your box a little bit and bring it to more of my kind of controversial, polarizing, conversations. Because I think that the conversations that most people are having are at this surface level, and they don't really do much to benefit the world, right? Or the world moving forward. So I had a message that I sent to a politician, to Bernie, actually. So I'll just name him. I sent this letter to him and his team, right? That I wanted to have a conversation with him about about his healthcare program, because to me he was just changing the payer but not the incentive, right? Until we change the incentives, we'll never change the outcomes. The incentives are going to get, or the outcomes are going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse as long as the incentives are there the way they are. And I guess the reason why I don't like the government is evil thing, or big government is evil, or any government is evil, or those kinds of things, is because some of the massive problems that we've had was as soon as we deregulated certain industries, like we deregulated the savings and loan industry. What happened with the savings and loan industry? We deregulated, there used to be a thing about conglomerations. You couldn't be too big to fail because you weren't allowed to conglomerate your companies. And right now we just allowed, within the last few years, Bayer, which is the largest pharmaceutical company, to merge with Monsanto, which is the largest agricultural and food company on the planet. They control, I think it's 80 to 90% of all seed in the world. And so now we have the biggest chemical and agricultural company combined with the biggest pharmaceutical company, making incentives for them to poison you so that then they can treat you. Whether that's what they're going to do or not doesn't even matter, because incentive is there, and we allowed that incentive to be in existence because we allowed them to merge and to have intricately woven policies between the two of them that have like, well, here's how we're going to grow, and then how's we're going to grow, and we're going to grow this way, and we're going to grow that way, right? So we've incentivized fraud. We've incentivized poisoning our air. We've incentivized all those things. And since the citizenry, for the most part, doesn't even know that that's existing or that's happening, they can never protest it. They can never speak up about it because they're unaware that it's in existence. And so the last thing that I want to talk to you about, and I think this will lead back to some of what we started with. But I have this premise: silence is a bully's best friend. And that premise ends with, so why are we, the people, allowing the bullies to win? So that's a psychological, emotional maturity. We go back to that first initial part of our conversation. Why are we allowing the bullies to win?
Yeah. So the bullies being in this situation,
Government and industry. Let's
right?
say. But it's all bullies. It's in general. It could be the bully in your class when there's 30 kids in the class and one kid's a bully and the 30 kids are afraid of him, right? It could be any scenario in which that small person, the dictator, the queen, the king, the nobleman, the business, right? When that small singular person who runs an entire organization, you're a boss, you have 35 employees, right? So you could be the bully or you could be the victor for those people. You have that choice, right? But why do we as people let the bullies win when it goes completely against our own self-interest?
Yeah. I think honestly, like moral courage or just courage in general, um, is in pretty short supply. I have a number of friends who are, um, let's say, have controversial viewpoints, and a lot of them business owners, and they choose not to speak up because there's just no upside for them, right? Like, I say this, I'm going to alienate potentially half my staff, half my customer base. It's just like, what's the point? um, you could risk getting censored on social media, and who knows what else they're going to do, right? There's threats of, like, there's been in the past, shutting down people's credit cards accounts so they can't take payment. Like, there's all kinds of potential downside. And I'm someone who's decided I'm going to speak up regardless. It's costing me business. It's cost me some great hires that I wanted to have, and they're like, nope, I'm out. Um, and for me, that's what I have to do as a human being. Like, there's a cost. Even I'm here in this country on a visa, right? Do you think it hasn't crossed my mind that when my visa comes up for renewal, that some, like, person bureaucrat is going to look at my social media and be like, wait, what did you mean with that thing? What, like, I mean, and maybe they'll look at it and be like, hey, yay, thumbs up. Or maybe they'll look at it and be like, I don't know, right? But chances are it's going to be looked at. So these things might have, like, already have real world consequences for me. But for me, it's more important to be in integrity with my word, and not and with what I stand for, and stand up for what I believe in, even though it is costly. It's only when it's costly that it counts, right? Really. And so, and the more of us that cower, that lets us cower, and lets them, quote unquote them, but lets ourselves be silenced, the worse it gets. And the more of us speak up, if everybody was speaking up about the things that are most controversial and that are going to get you the most in trouble, then, like, nobody can do anything, right? Like, it's just, it's too much. So it only works when we let ourselves be bullied. So it comes down to that: what do we choose for us, right? And that has impacts beyond you and I, right? It has ripple effects, and that's how we do it, and that's why we're letting it happen right now.
Yeah, I in my profession, I say to doctors that I've consulted and worked with, like, how many people that are doctors that have the same feeling about the moral injury and the systems of medicine that you're being told to treat a patient, and that it's not the best way to treat that patient? How many doctors? Oh, there's 20, 30, 40 that personally. So what would happen if you all joined forces and got loud together? And then how many people that you don't know have that same feeling as well? And what would happen if those 40 people met your 40 people, and then you joined forces and collaborated and came together? And then what's going to happen to those administrations, those bureaucrats, those money interested, incentivized people that really don't care about human health? They only care about that bottom line. What happens to them when you stand up? Oh, well, when I stand up, they can't, they can bully me as an individual, but they can't bully the group as a mass collection. And I kind of remind them, well, don't you know that you are the majority in the industry, not the minority, that you're allowing this small group of administrators and finance people tell you how to take care of a patient that they didn't spend 10 years learning how to do, and it's like, it's almost like having to take them down to a basic level of being a child, and reminding them who they are and what's possible for them. And it's odd to me to see it and go, okay, so where was the first time I was bullied, when I was told to be silent? And that's kind of where I wanted to go with you a little bit. When's the first time? And then what do you do when you ask that question and realize that you've allowed yourself to be bullied because you were bullied as a kid and you stopped maturing? Like I said, going back to the
Right.
part of our conversation.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was bullied in school. From as early as I can remember, like preschool, kindergarten. So up through I think 8th grade. I changed schools between 7th and 8th grade and decided to sort of basically opt out of the social hierarchy and focus on school learning, and moved to a school that valued what was actually being taught. It was a private school, from a public school to a private school. So that was definitely a major, major impact on my life and major change point. And then had to go back and revisit that whole social element. It was interesting. Last year, actually, year and a half ago in April, I was on Necker Island with Richard Branson and 30, extinguished, accomplished entrepreneurs, one of whom is a South African real estate mogul, former friend of Nelson Mandela, and he has 7 private jets, like 7. One guy, so I'm like, dude, Caesar, why do you have 7 jets? I see one, I like it, I buy it. Anyway, so like really like accomplished entrepreneurs, some of them. And I felt like I was right back in school, right? With these, like, do I belong here? Am I worthy? Like all of those feelings came back up again. And it was amazing because it really allowed me to heal some of those old wounds from my school years. And it really set me off. I've my entire life up until then, I'd been a terrible, quote unquote, like networker. I'd been very isolated, just sitting at home in front of my computer, programming. My company's all remote, so I just get to sit in this room all day. It really changed my life, like being stuck on an island with 30 high-level entrepreneurs for a week, because it allowed me to reprocess all of these emotions, right? That was a major, major win for me from that week. And so since then, I've been opened up myself so much more to meet other people. So yeah, it really is, I feel like too, like I've been bullied in relationships. My first marriage was like there would it wasn't like, I just mention it because it's kind of counterintuitive, right? There were incidents of domestic violence, but they're towards me, right? But it was just like how I grew up learning to relate, right? That like, well, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm probably did something, and if she like hits me, it's probably because I deserve it. Like, I mean, she wasn't gonna beat me to a pulp or anything like that. It was quite small in that sense, but still, just that sentiment that was somehow okay, right? Like, so I think it, how we relate really tends to impact all of our relationships, right? So, and we tend to very much project authority, like our relationship with our parents, we project that onto the government, onto some person in uniform, onto our boss, onto like money, onto time, right? Concepts like that. So that work of healing our relationships is another like lifelong journey and process that pays dividends on so many levels.
Absolutely. And we will definitely have to get into another conversation, less controversial, more on the individual rather than the systems. But I wanted to expose that you know that the system is us. We are the system. And I think people forget that we made this shit up and we can make it up better. So why don't you give 3 or 4, tips and tricks, actionable steps that the audience can take to create their new tomorrow today and activate their vision for a better world?
It comes always back to the basics, because the basics is what people miss. Like always, right? We're so busy wanting to do all the advanced stuff, and we just overlook the most fundamental things. So number one, what do you want? Right? What is it you want? What is the outcome? What does it look like? What does success look like? How will it feel? Whatever it is. If we're talking about, what does the ideal government look like, right? Or more realistically for your own life, right? What is it that you want for your health, your work, your relationships, your creativities? Get really clear on that. And then just start moving towards that, right? So many people are focused on what they don't want. They're unhappy. They just want to complain to someone. Like victimhood, oh my God, it's a whole other conversation we can have. I've spent so much of my life feeling like if only I had had better parents or better friends or better whatever, been born in a different country, like whatever, I'd be more successful and then I'd be happy. And the only result of that was that I had to remain unhappy and unsuccessful just to prove them that it was their fault, right? Until I was like, dude, no, like this is on me. I can choose, I can create happiness and success for myself. And like, they never did anything wrong. It's fine, right? It's on me. So, and that's again, like instead of focusing on what you don't want and focusing on blaming people, focus on what you want and what you can do, and then get working, get to work on that.
Awesome.
And there's one other thing, it would be to really get curious about what it is that you're here to do, right? That sense of of mission, of purpose in life. For me, that's been such a game changer. It was, in February 2008, 12, almost 13 years ago now. My life hasn't been the same. Everything changed in that moment that I just knew what I was here to do. And having that sense of mission is so important, that sense of higher purpose, higher meaning in life. I feel like so many of us are lost. We get lost in the details, in the minutiae, in the whatever, the gossip, and who violated us in some way or whatever, because we've lost that sense of deeper meaning, deeper purpose.
I get that. So how can people get a hold of you if they like what you said and they want to learn more about you or your software and how that might possibly help them? How can people get a hold of you?
Yes. So 3 websites. CalvinCorreli.com is my personal website. NotableNation.com is the political project that we talked about. And then Simplero.com, Simplero.com, one word, is the software. So Those will be three. And you can email me, Calvin, at any of those, and it'll go to me. And yeah, it's really, Simplera, if you want to, if you're doing some kind of business selling, education selling, information, Notable Nation, if you want to get involved in that movement that we have a show coming up like every Thursday night. We're going to do a show called Getting Real, where we discuss some issue and then just try to get real solving it. And then CalvinCorreli.com for my sort of follow my personal and everything that I do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Calvin, for coming on. I know the audience has gotten a lot of benefit from this conversation and the things that you had to say. And so I really am grateful for this conversation, for you helping people create their new tomorrow today and activate their vision for a better world. I am your host, Ari Gronich, and this is Awesome Conversations with Ari. No, it's not. It's just creating a new tomorrow. But remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, comment below so we can start conversations that move the country forward, move yourselves forward, and create your new tomorrow today. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I appreciate all you do to create a new tomorrow for yourself and those around you. If you'd like to take this information further and are interested in joining a community of like-minded people who are all passionate about activating their vision for a better world, go to the website createanewtomorrow.com and find out how you can be part of making a bigger difference. I have a gift for you just for checking it out and look forward to seeing you take the leap and joining our private paid mastermind community. Until then, see you on the next episode.